Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 201, The Poisoner. Part 1. On the 1st of August 1952, there was a small article that announced a poisoner's release. It says that Alister Jenner Clark, a wife poisoner, has been approved for release by the Minister of Justice. Clark has been in prison 23 years. In 1929, when he was 24, he was sentenced to death for the murder of his wife, Ella Mary Clark. It was alleged that he poisoned his wife, who was in hospital, with arsenic-covered chocolates. So who was Alister William Clark? Well, Alister William Frank Jenner Clark was born in Lewisham, New South Wales on the 8th of January 1906. He was the second child of four born to Charles Arthur Clark and Adeline Eva Jenner. His father was a Clark and they were English. His father emigrated in his early 20s and his mother emigrated with her family as a child. Charles Clark and Adeline Jenner married at White Hills near Bendigo, and by the late 1860s they settled at Muswellbrook, New South Wales. Alister Frank Jenner Clark married Ella May Elchin in Gunning, New South Wales on the 11th of July 1925. They had a daughter 3 months before their marriage, another daughter in 1926 who died as an infant, and a son in April 1927. Alister was a real estate agent. His wife Ella died on the 12th of October 1928 at the Coast Hospital at Little Bay, New South Wales at the age of only 21. Only 8 days after his wife's death, Alister married Bryda Blanche Marks. In the New South Wales Wellington Times on the 25th of October 1928, an article titled "Sensational Development, Husband Charged with Murder." At the Central Police Court yesterday afternoon, Alister Jenner Clark, 24, a salesman, was charged with having at Sydney on October the 12th feloniously and maliciously murdering Ella May Clark, his wife. 8 days after the young woman died in hospital, her husband, still in his early 20s, married again. Mrs. Clark, who lived with her husband in one of the western suburbs, was taken ill several months ago. She failed to respond to treatment and gradually became worse. She was in a serious condition at the latter end of the month and died on the 12th of October. When a certificate was given, arrangements were made for the funeral, which was carried out a couple of days later. The husband seemed very upset at the untimely end of his wife. Following the funeral, Clark went to live in the eastern suburbs and a short time later married there. The newly married couple then went to live at Bondi. Rumours reached the police and a big force of detectives have been making investigations for the past few days. Following the exhumation of the body, a post-mortem examination was held. The cause of death has not yet been made public, but it is understood that the contents of the stomach were forwarded to the government analyst. Clark's first wife was 21 years of age when she died. They had 2 children, and his second wife was only 19. And on October the 24th, Alister Jenner Clark was in court. Mr. McMahon SM heard the charge in the Central Police Court and remanded the accused to November the 1st and refused an application of Mr. J. McDougall for the accused for bail. Sergeant Dennis, the police prosecutor, in opposing the application for bail, said, "I would like to place certain facts before your worship. The accused was married in 1925 and an order was made against him for the maintenance of an illegitimate child. His wife, the deceased, was taken ill on July the 10th, suffering from supposed food poisoning. She was attended by a local medical man at Stanmore. Her condition did not improve in 10 days and she was sent to the Coast Hospital. On July 20th, her health was bad. She showed every symptom of slow arsenical poisoning. On the 12th of October, she died. Dr. McMasters, the Deputy Superintendent of the Coast Hospital, held a post-mortem examination and portion of the woman's anatomy was forwarded to the government analyst. Before the result of the analysis was known, the deceased was buried. The accused often visited his wife in hospital, taking her fruit, cake and chocolates, and because of the paralysis of her hands, he used to feed her with these. On his visits to the hospital, he was accompanied by a woman with whom he lived while his wife was in the institution. This woman used to wait outside. On the 20th of October, the accused was married to her. 2 government medical officers have since held an examination of the dead woman and have established that her death was due to slow arsenical poisoning. And in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, on the 25th of October, startling murder charge against young husband, slowly poisoned by arsenic, says police, fed his wife with cakes, fruit and chocolates while another woman waited outside. Amazing story unfolded. Clark, a young man of 24, described as an agent, is of medium build, sallow complexion and was neatly dressed in a brown suit. A black band was displayed conspicuously on his right arm. In the Sydney Sun on the 26th of November 1928, nearly 50 witnesses will be called by the police and the inquest is expected to last for a week. Clark looked more dapper than his first appearance at the Central Court on the 24th of October. He wore a purplish suit and a black mourning armband. His second wife is a tall, slender, good-looking girl, and she was dressed in black with a straw hat trimmed with black ribbon. Dr. Carl John Zimmerman of Percival Road, Stanmore, was the first witness, and he said he knew Ella Mary Clark. She was still under his treatment on the 13th and 14th of July. About the 14th of July, the witness was called to Ella Clark's address, a room in Middleton Street, Stanmore, where she complained of abdominal pain and vomiting. The witness asked her what she'd been eating, and she replied that she'd been eating tin tongue and had since fell ill. The witness diagnosed her with food poisoning and treated her accordingly. She was constantly vomiting and there was some collapse. This continued for a whole week, and at the end of the week she got worse and did not respond to the treatment. Mr. Zimmerman said that Ella Clark had told him she'd had a disease some time ago and he believed he was treating her for a recurrence of the aftermath of it. He was asked what was Ella Clark's condition after the convulsions, and he said she was out to it when I saw her after the first one and I gave her hypodermic of strychnine. I take it, doctor, that you never suspected anything except food poisoning throughout? And he said no. Mr. Zimmerman added that during the illness of Mrs. Clark, she appeared very anxious about her condition. Mrs. Clark had not complained to the witness of the attitude of her husband. Was the recurrence of vomiting consistent with the patient receiving arsenic from time to time? And the doctor said it was consistent. Dr. Robert Maxwell McMaster, Deputy Superintendent at the Coast Hospital, said on the 22nd of October he saw the body of Mrs. Ella May Clark at the morgue and identified it. She was admitted to the Coast Hospital on the 20th of July. He examined her on the 1st of August and found she was considerably wasted and had weakness in the arms and legs. She was not able to walk and he did not think that she could hold anything in her hands. She could not feed herself and he considered the condition arose from neuritis. In September, her condition seemed a good deal better. She was still thin, but she'd put on a little weight. The vomiting had ceased. Early in October, she complained of blisters in her mouth. He saw 2 patches that might have been tiny blisters and he ordered the suspension of medicine she was taking. She had suffered a good deal of vomiting in the last 6 or 7 days of her life. The witness saw her 5 or 6 times in the last week. She did not seem quite so well, but he was not specially anxious about her condition. She seemed strange in manner, and the night before her death she was very restless. On the morning of her death she suddenly became very much worse. Dr. McMaster agreed it was a puzzling case. He had consulted Dr. Alfred Campbell on Mrs. Clark's general condition. He said that when Clark was told that there would be a post-mortem examination, he expressed the hope that there would be no disfigurement. Clark also asked why he had not been called up before his wife's death. The witness replied that it was because he had no fear of her death just previously. The prescription that had been given to the patient aimed mostly at calming the nerves and preventing the vomiting. The fits could have been caused by a hysterical condition. He was asked, "Have you since formed an opinion on the cause of death?" "Yes," said the doctor. "After some hesitation, I am of the opinion she died from arsenic poisoning." "Acute or chronic?" He said, "Both." "On what do you base that opinion?" "Going back over the history of the case, I thought many of the symptoms that could have been caused by arsenic." "Symptoms that you did not notice at the time?" And he said, "Yes." Dr. McMaster said he did not think that Ella Clark was going to die. However, she did die on Friday, October the 12th. He was asked, "You say that her condition improved up to 6 days from her death and then she got worse?" And he said, "Yes." "Her condition was improving except for the paralysis?" And he said, "Yes." The taking of small doses of arsenic poison would make the body immune from doses which would kill other people. When a person suffering from chronic arsenical poisoning, the taking of further doses would cause further vomiting? He said, yes, I suppose so. 6 days before she died, you noticed a change? He said, yes. Did you change her medicine? Yes, I ordered them to be stopped. For 13 or 14 days before her death, these medicines were administered? And he said, yes. One of these medicines contained arsenic? And he said, yes. How many times a day was that administered? And he said 3 times. The medicine had started on the 23rd of September. And there was no vomiting in August and September up to September the 22nd? And he said no. Dr. McMaster said he believed that Mrs. Clark remained in a bed on the veranda of the ward for a week, and she was brought in on the Thursday before her death. Dr. Cecil Walters, Senior Medical Officer at the Coast Hospital, said that his note stated that on the 20th of July the patient had a fit which lasted a minute. On the 21st of July she was reported to have had 2 hysterical fits during the night and complained of blurred vision. On the 22nd of July there was a note of the patient's complaint of pins and needles feeling in the fingers and toes, but her vision was much better. Dr. Robert Malcolm, another doctor from the staff of the Coast Hospital, said when he examined Mrs. Clark, the muscles of the arms and legs were tended to pressure, and there was a pronounced herpes eruption on the right side of the face near the eye and extending to the scalp. Dr. Albert Hoskins of Coast Hospital staff saw Mrs. Clark when he was relieving Dr. McMaster on the 22nd of September. He ordered a tonic mixture. The patient showed evidence then of multiple neuritis. He considered that there was general improvement over the 3 days in which he attended her. He did not suspect arsenical poisoning. If he had, he would not have prescribed the medicine he'd given to Mrs. Clark. Nurse Dorothy Scarlett of Stanmore said she had been sent by Dr. Zimmerman to see Mrs. Clark on the 16th of July. She found Mrs. Clark in bed. She was very weak and sick and weary. On the Thursday evening, Mrs. Clark seemed to be seriously ill. She said she'd got out and got some lunch and knocked herself out. She told witness that she had a funny turn and said, I think it was because I am hungry. I went out to boil an egg when I heard a noise and found her in a convulsion. It lasted 8 minutes and she'd recovered when Dr. Zimmerman arrived. Just as the doctor started his car, she took another convulsion and I sent a message to the doctor again. I know I stayed till 9:15, but Mr. Clark was not home when I left. Nurse Scarlett told how the doctor had said it was a hospital case, but Mrs. Clark could not be moved without the consent of her husband. When she spoke to Clark about it, he agreed the hospital was the place for his wife. The deceased told her she had been ill for 10 days before the witness went to her and mentioned tinned meats had given her potamine poisoning. The witness saw Clark at the flat twice. Mrs. Clark was very reticent about her family affairs, beyond saying that her husband's father and mother were coming out from England. She was asked, can you describe the fit she had? She said she was twitching, her muscles contracted and her breathing was very laboured and her pulse was low. Miss Caroline Bowman of Middleton Street, Stanmore, said she knew the Clarks. They lived with her for 4 months previously and returned about March. Did you complain to Clark about the hours he kept? She said yes. Latterly, he kept very bad hours. I don't think he was home much at all before midnight recently. Do you remember the deceased being taken ill in the July when the doctor was called? She said, yes, I went to see Dr. Zimmerman one Saturday morning. The deceased was very ill. She was not able to help herself. She could not keep her food down. Whenever I used to take her Marmite at night, she could not keep it down. That was only towards the end. She had been like that, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks. I saw her in 3 fits on one night, the Thursday night before she was taken away. She was asked, was Mr. Clark home then? She said, no, I stayed with her until midnight and he was not home then. How often have you spoken to Clark about his late hours? On many occasions. He told me he was out looking for business. Miss Bowman said she often used to take down bovkul that was prepared by Mrs. Gilligan upstairs, and she frequently stayed for a quarter of an hour in Clark's flat. On the Thursday night, Mrs. Clark had 3 fits. She screamed as if she was in pain and was twitching all over. Do you bear any grudge against Clark? She said, certainly not. I don't see how I should. I mothered them for 3 years. But you expressed feelings of disappointment about him? Certainly. Did you see any medicine bottles about the home? Yes, but I could not say what they were. Mrs. Clark and Mr. Clark told her that they had been poisoned by tin tongues. Mr. Clark said he had put his finger down his throat and made himself ill. Were you present when the little girl vomited? No, I did not know she vomited. Mrs. Bowman told Mr. Gee that she did not know whether the children had any of the tin tongue. Mrs. Annie Manning said that she lived with her son at flats in Bondi. Clark had boarded at the flat. Miss Bryder Marks had also boarded there. The witness attended the funeral of Mrs. Clark. On the following Friday, there were words between her son and Miss Marks that evening because Miss Marks and Clark had returned home late for tea. Miss Marks was going to leave, but witness persuaded her not to leave. Clark and Miss Marks did not tell her that night that they were going to be married. When they did tell her, she said, "Oh, that's all she could remember." Mrs. Manning said she had been present at the wedding of Clark and Miss Marks and was also present when the police came to the flats. "I asked Bryder where she was going and then I broke up," said the witness. "I was very upset. I think she said she was going to jail. I can't remember whether Miss Marks first brought him to my house or whether he came alone." And the next day, on the 27th of November, in the New South Wales Newcastle Sun, Clark inquest continues. No smiles for his young bride greeted Alister Jenner Clark today as he entered the coroner's court in custody into the inquiry of the death of his first wife, Ella Mary Clark. Yesterday, his wife had smiled so much at him and had sought to communicate with him by movements of the lips that Detective James asked her to stop the signals. This morning, the second Mrs. Clark was not present in court. Sister Joanna MacArthur of the Coast Hospital said that Mrs. Clark gave her the history of her illness when she was admitted on the 16th of July. Mr. Rogers for the Crown read a report that stated Mrs. Clark had spoken of having eaten tin tongue and believed that she'd been poisoned by it, and that the sister confirmed this. Did she say whether anyone else had been sick after eating the same food? Sister MacArthur said the doctor had asked Mrs. Clark that question, but she had replied that she did not know. From time to time, Mrs. Clark described to the witness symptoms during the last 3 months that she was in hospital. She complained on admission of having pins and needles in her hands and feet, and had made the same complaint several times later. Her hands and feet were put into splints, and Mrs. Clark was unable to put a hand to her mouth. The paralysis came on suddenly, and the patient could not lift a cup or support a plate. 3 or 4 times she'd seen a man who said he was Mrs. Clark's husband, and she noticed chocolates in the locker near Mrs. Clark's bed. Alister Jenner Clark had fed his wife with 2 cakes, which he took from a bag on one of his visits to the hospital, was the statement of Nurse Gwen Watt. "I had 2, she declared. Mrs. Clark told her, but I don't want to say more because they are too hard." Nurse Watt said that when Mrs. Clark was well enough to eat the food her husband brought in for her, she gave her chocolates to take away the taste of the medicine. Mrs. Clark never complained the chocolates made her sick. Nurse Watt also declared that Mrs. Clark used to cry during visits by her husband. And in the Sydney Evening News on the 29th of November, amazing statements alleged to have been made to the police by Alister Jenner Clark concerning the mysterious death of his wife were read by Detective James at the inquest today. The first was as follows. "I am a real estate agent doing business in Pitt Street, Sydney, and I reside at Bondi. I was the husband of the late Ella Mary Clark, who died at number 19 Ward, Coast Hospital, on the morning of the 12th of October. I first met the deceased in a railway carriage while travelling from Barellan to Sydney about 5 years ago. I struck up an acquaintance, and after keeping company for some time we got married at her mother's home at Gunning, New South Wales. There was 1 child before the marriage and it died 6 months later. There are 2 children of the marriage. From the time that we got married up until 6 months ago, we lived happily together, other than a few arguments. What caused most of the arguments was that she used to say that she had caught me and made me marry her. Otherwise, we were quite happy together. About 6 months ago, I contracted a venereal disease from my wife, who had the disease from the time I met her. She was being treated by a doctor at Gunning. She left the doctor and started treating herself. I told her to go to him. I can't remember the doctor's name. She told me she had the disease. About 9 months after I met her, familiarity commenced. We believed that she was cured. The first child was born about a fortnight before we were married. We were married in July 1925. Before meeting my wife, I met a girl named Lucy Gordon at Barellan. She was about 20 years of age. I just knew her in the town to speak to. The next thing that I knew, I got summonsed for maintenance in respect to a child that was to be born and was born in February 1926, and an order for 10 shillings a week was given against me. My wife, the deceased, knew about this. I paid on the order for 12 months together with £30 expenses. The order was made against me on non-appearance as I did not have the money to travel from Sydney to Ardlethan to defend the matter, and I still maintained that I was not guilty. My father stuck to me right through the case. He endeavoured to appear, but it was too late. The girl has had other children since, and so I am informed by the Child Welfare Department that they decided to let the matter drop in regards to the circumstances. I came to reside in Sydney during September 1925 with the deceased and child. On the 9th of January of that year, the child died of gastroenteritis at Renwick Hospital for infants and was buried at Rookwood Cemetery. When we first came to Sydney, we lived with Mrs. Linklater at Merton Street, Stanmore. We lived there for about 6 months and we had various places around the locality. Mrs. Moriarty, then Miss Bowman in Stanmore. We then lived in Marrickville and Ryde. We had these places by ourselves. We then moved to Stanmore and lived again with Mrs. Bowman. Up to this time were 2 children born. My wife was very unhealthy and continued to be taken away to hospitals. She was at the Coast Hospital with diphtheria on 2 occasions and was at the Women's Hospital at Paddington before the last child was born, and then the Coast Hospital where she was admitted in July, which is where she died on the 12th of October. About June of this year, the disease again broke out on her and I contracted it. I went with her to Dr. Zimmerman's rooms in Stanmore where the doctor closely questioned both of us and he came to the conclusion that she had not been properly cured in the first place. I was at this time under treatment by Dr. Cummings of the Sydney Hospital. I was not satisfied with the treatment there and I went to Dr. LaBallister of Bondi and he later gave me a certificate as cured, and 2 days later the disease returned and I'm still suffering from it. All through this illness, the wife and I got on very well together. I don't know the date, but on returning from work one evening at about 6 p.m, we had tin tongues for tea. I did not eat until supper time when I had what was left. The next morning, my wife, the little girl, and I complained of severe pains. We gave the little girl a dose of castor oil and also myself and my wife. I retched and felt much better. The little girl was very ill, but got all right in a day. The wife continued vomiting and she went to Dr. Zimmerman, who ordered her to bed and prescribed medicine for her. She continued vomiting for about a week, and every day I used to ring the doctor from my business to inquire how she was after he had seen her. On Friday of the same week, I rang the doctor as usual and he informed me that she could have an egg for tea and probably get up the next day. I asked him if it was all right for me to go to a lodge meeting of the Friendly Societies and he said it was quite all right. On returning home at 12:30 a.m, I found her in a very bad state. She'd been in convulsions, so I sat up with her all night. When the doctor came the next morning, he ordered her to be removed to the Coast Hospital. At 11 a.m, the ambulance was called and she was taken away to the hospital and the children were removed to the Saba home in Bondi. I went to the hospital and visited my wife every visiting night and Sunday afternoons in company with Miss Bryder Marks. She was not with me always, but on most occasions. She would remain outside while I went in and saw the wife. I also went very often on Friday and Tuesday afternoons. When I started treatment with Dr. LaBallister, I had to go to him on Mondays and Thursdays and was unable to visit the hospital, but never missed Tuesday and Friday afternoons. My wife used to complain to me that she was sick of it, sick of suffering, and told me that if the doctors did not soon cure her, she would put herself out of the way. I pleaded with her not to be silly and saw the sister of the ward on several occasions to see if anything could be done for her. I was informed that it was only a matter of time and that she would be in the hospital for some time as she was so weak. I took her anything that she asked me to, in the way of fruits, eggs and chocolate. I used to buy the chocolates all over the place, but mostly at the shop at the corner of Daceyville Junction. On one occasion I was going to take the children out to see her when the matron of Scarborough refused to let me do so on account of them suffering from measles, but I assured her that they would be well cared for. She very seldom asked after the children. Very often she seemed to me to be delirious as she spoke of such silly things. On one occasion I was afraid of her and asked the nurse to watch her as I did not know what she might do to herself. One occasion in the evening she informed me that one of her old boys had been out to see her and she wanted to go out and live with him. She told me he was coming back to see her on a certain night and I went there purposely to try and see him, but he did not turn up. Later, he went again and asked her for the same question. This was 3 weeks before she died. I told her not to be silly, as I was looking forward to her coming home to me again. On the Friday before her death, she told me she had asked the doctors when she could come home. He told her that she had better wait a couple more weeks. She said she would remind him when the 2 weeks were up, and we chatted together about how we would arrange things. The next thing I knew, I was rung from the Coast Hospital, and they stated that she had passed away suddenly. I immediately went straight to the hospital, where I saw Dr. McMasters, who asked my consent to a post-mortem examination, which I gave. This is all I have to say. I made arrangements for the funeral and the burial to be with my late daughter. I was unable to find her people, but eventually found them by letter. I cannot understand, and I am in no way responsible for my dear wife's death. I have nothing else to say. And then it was signed by him, and the detective sergeant was the witness. Then there was another statement made about Bridie Marks. About the start of this year, I was introduced to her at a restaurant. I used to go in there frequently for dinner, and I became friends with her. Very often, she came to me crying, and I asked her what was the matter, and she said she had no friends in the world, and that her mother and father were separated, and that I was the only one that had any time for her. She told all her troubles to me. She asked for money for tram fares, and she said that she wished that she would be able to be mixed up with me. But I said that I was no good to her, that I was married and had 2 children, but I would do what was possible to make her life a little brighter. We went to the pictures, and I asked her to have a drink with me alone, which she did. I was feeling unhappy owing to my wife being taken away and my home broken up many times through sickness. I appreciated the offer of Bridie Marks of boarding at Darlinghurst. While at the Manning home, Miss Bridie Marks and I went out together frequently. She went into hospital with appendicitis and remained there for 3 weeks. When she came out, I paid her board until she was strong enough to go to business. She is now in my employ as a secretary, and there has never been anything between us apart from friendship. She was in my office at the time I received the news of my wife's death and was greatly cut up at the news. It was a shock to both of us. She attended the funeral on the Saturday and all went well. On Friday the 19th, on returning home from tea, an argument occurred with the people at the house and Miss Marks. In view of the circumstances, we chatted over the matter and came to the conclusion that the best thing for us to do would be to get married the next day, so as we could leave the house and bring my children with us to rear them. There had never been any mention of marriage by us or anyone concerned with us until Friday the 19th. I think that is all I have to say. At the time of the marriage, I thought she was underage, but I was not too sure. I knew that she gave her age at 23. I have read this statement and is true and correct. Signed, Alister J. Clark, witness, and N. James, Detective Sergeant. On the 29th of November in the Sydney Sun, a dramatic story of how he had interrupted a party where the marriage of Alister Jenner Clark and Bridie Marks was being celebrated at a flat in Bondi was told by Detective James. A man who he said was the father of Bridie Marks grew very excited when he told him that Clark's first wife had just died and that he'd married his daughter immediately afterwards. "Will I kill him?" was what James alleged Marks said. There was no diminution of public interest this morning when the inquest entered upon its 4th day. A full gallery waited at the doors of the coroner's court to open. 6 women who have followed the evidence since Monday were the first to reach the public part of the court. Detective Sergeant Norman Devine James said that, with Detective Swasbrick, they went to the flat in Bondi Road, Bondi, on the 23rd of October. He saw Clark there and had an interview with him at the entrance of the flat. I said, "I might as well tell you that it has been established that the cause of death was arsenical poisoning." Clark said, "I am only boarding here." I said, "Who else is boarding here?" He said, "Mrs. Manning occupies the flat. Her son lives with her, a man named Burke, and Miss Marks and myself." He said, "I sleep on the veranda at the back." I said, "Are you living here with the woman Marks you referred to?" He said, "No, she is boarding." I said, "What is she to you?" And he said, "Only a friend." I said, "From inquiries I have made, I have been told that you've been quite indifferent over your deceased wife's illness when she was at home, and I have also been informed that you've been carrying on with this woman Marks, who is said to be well known at the casino at Bondi, and that you would not come home till the small hours of the morning." He said, "That is not right. My wife was well looked after. I have a nurse and a little girl looking after her." The woman, Bryder Marks, came downstairs and said to Clark, "Will you be long?" He said, "That's Miss Marks." And I said to her, "What is this man to you?" She hesitated for some moments, looked at Clark, and Clark looked at her, and he said, "She is my wife. We got married last Saturday." I said, "Then you don't occupy the back veranda as you said." He said, "I used to." I said, "I am going to search your room for poisons. Have you any poison in your room?" And they both said no. "In the room," said James, "I found 2 marriage certificates, one certified to the marriage of Clark and Bryder Blanche Marks. In the room the letter produced was found." I said to Clark after having read it, "Did you write this letter to your present wife?" He said, "Yes, 6 weeks ago." Previously, Detective James said that he told Clark that he had been informed that he suffered from a disease, had given it to his wife, and that this woman Marks was the cause of all the trouble. Clark said it was not so. Clark added that he had not got it from his first wife, who had it before the marriage. I said, "Can you assist us in any way to determine how your wife could be poisoned with arsenic in the hospital?" Clark replied, "That has given me a great shock. On one visit my wife told me that a former sweetheart had been out there and had asked her to live with him." I said, "What, sick and crippled woman?" He said, "Well, that's what she told me." I said to Clark, "You will be detained until you can verify your statements." Later I said to him, "I have been to the hospital and cannot verify your statement about any other man visiting your wife, other than a man who came with a woman and you. So you see, your statement about the former lover is not substantiated, and you have been seen, as you have stated, to take chocolates to your wife and feed her with them." He said, "That's right." I said, "You will still be detained here. Are you quite comfortable?" He said, "Yes, you're treating me very well." The following morning he said, "Look, Sergeant, I would like you to give me a chance. I know I'll have some difficulty in proving my innocence, but I do wish to turn over a new leaf and lead a better life." I turned the pockets of the clothes he was wearing onto a sheet of clean paper. I dusted each pocket carefully and in Clark's presence placed the dust removed from the clothes in an envelope and sealed it. Later, I returned to Clark's room in Bondi Road and went to the same wardrobe. I saw the same clothing there. Clark was present. I said, "Are these your clothes?" He said, "Yes." I placed the suit of clothes in a bag. When I was about to fold the overcoat produced, Clark said, "This is not my coat." I said, "Well, who does it belong to?" He said, "It belongs to Bert, the lodger." I said to Mr. Manning, "Is Bert in?" He was referring to Mr. Brown. Manning said yes. Manning came back and said, "Bert says the coat doesn't belong to him." Clark said, "Well, it was here when I came here and I've been wearing it." I searched the pockets of this overcoat and found tram tickets screwed up in a ball. I found a button in the overcoat pocket which corresponds with the missing button on the lavender blue suit. I later charged Clark with having murdered his wife. He made no reply. Dr. Leslie Labalesta of Bondi said that Clark called at his surgery on the 21st of July. He examined Clark on the 4th of August and found him to be suffering from a disease for which he treated him until the 2nd of October and declared him cured. The witness said he had an impression that Clark asked him to see a young woman, Bryder Marks, who he said he hoped to marry. Later, the impression of witness was that Clark said he was married but was separated from his wife. Reverend Frederick Riley of St Mary's Church of England, Waverley, said that after he had received particulars from Reverend John Walker Russell, Clark called at the church with a young woman. Witness asked Clark when his wife had died, and Clark replied in a low voice that she died some months ago. At least he thought Clark said either some or 6 months. He asked Clark how his wife had died, and Clark said she passed away very quietly at the Coast Hospital. The witness also questioned Miss Marks about her age. She said she was 23. The witness gave her the usual warning about the possible outcome of a false statement about age, and he then celebrated the marriage. Edna Mae Jones, a schoolgirl living with her parents at Wallara, said she was a patient at the Coast Hospital from June to October this year. She saw Clark at the hospital and saw him bring Mrs. Clark chocolates and put them in her mouth. Sometimes Mrs. Clark appeared depressed, and the witness had seen her crying on occasions. On the 30th of November 1928, in the Sydney Sun, coroner's finding of murder. That Mrs. Ella Mary Clark, aged 21, had died at the Coast Hospital on the 12th of October from the effects of arsenic administered by her husband, Alister Jenner Clark, 24, salesman of Stanmore, at the Coast Hospital. This was the finding of the city coroner at the close of the Clark inquest this afternoon. An unsuccessful application for bail was made by Mr. Gee, counsel for Clark, who argued that because of the Christmas law vacation approaching, Clark might not be presented for trial before March and he'd have to spend 5 months in jail. The coroner committed Clark for trial at the present sitting of the Central Criminal Court on a charge of having murdered his wife. Mrs. Clark, the second wife, exclaimed, "Oh my God," in a broken voice by sobs when the coroner announced the verdict. Clark kept sweeping his hand across his face and swayed slightly when he was asked to rise for the formal committal. "After having watched the evidence very carefully," said Mr. May when giving his verdict, "I think I can find only one verdict, that Ella Mary Clark died of the effects of arsenic administered by her husband, Alister Jenner Clark. I further find that Alister Jenner Clark feloniously and maliciously murdered his wife, Ella Mary Clark." Mr. Gee argued that the defence would be hampered in preparing its evidence to rebut the case put up by the Crown, and that all cases were circumstantial, but in this case there were complications by the intricate medical evidence submitted, and there were also possibilities such as self-administration of poison or accidental administration. He added that Clark's business had been disorganised by his detention, his funds were being absorbed in his defence, and that Clark was faced with an unfortunate series of coincidences touching his wife's death without attaching criminal blame to him. The coroner said, "I have great responsibility here, and although I did grant bail once, I think that the circumstances in this case are such that I am sorry I cannot accede to your request," and bail was refused. In part 2, I'll be covering the commencement of the trial.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.